Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is a review of the 2019 documentary Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, before I get into my full thoughts on this film, I want to give a very special shout out to Brock once again for requesting this review. If you have a particular film you would like to see me review or a topic you would like to hear me discuss, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description. Now, Scream Queen it's an interesting film. I think that it's a little bit too scattershot, a little bit too scatterbrained at times. It has a lot of different elements, a lot of different things that are discussed and covered in the documentary. And I feel there's only one or two elements that are really consistently engaging. The others are just kind of there and come across more as extras on a DVD or Blu-ray than something that is of real substance for a documentary, for a feature film. But the elements that really do speak to the audience and really do provide a worthwhile a story to tell are absolutely 100% worth seeing the film for. But I can't sit here and say that I agree with the critical reception of this film, which is almost unanimously positive all across the board in terms of like 5 stars, 100% in Rotten Tomatoes. It's not that good. It's still good though. It's still a good documentary, and I would say it is definitely worth a watch if you're a fan of Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 or the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. And also if you like Mark Patton, because this is a documentary that does a really wonderful job letting you get to know him on a much more intimate and deeper level. Now, this is a documentary that I wasn't really super psyched about because honestly, I didn't care for the trailer. I think it was not really the best trailer in terms of showing this film in the best possible light. There were moments that really made Mark come across as overly petty in the trailer, and some moments that were a little bit too sensationalist for my taste. And there actually were sequences in this film that were very sensationalist in nature and really did paint Mark in a very petty way. That being said, unlike the trailer, which doesn't really show you moments that really, not necessarily upend the pettiness, but at least make it something that doesn't come across as so out of place in terms of the overall vibe or feel of the documentary. Because in the documentary, the trailer for the documentary, it had a very different tone, a much lighter tone in comparison to some of the petty, barbs and back and forths and the scenes where Mark is really in essence trying to blame anyone else other than himself on the fact that he doesn't have a career in Hollywood right now. And he didn't have one after Nightmare 2. But the documentary actually does put that in context and turns it into a legitimate story of atonement and redemption on Mark's part. So that is something that I feel should have been mentioned a little bit more in the advertising for the film. Also, I was a bit leery of it because I had a run-in with Mark on social media. I left a comment on a friend of mine's page on Facebook, essentially saying things like I'm tired of hearing how gay Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 is, and so on and so forth. And I really, in hindsight, could have worded it differently, and I wish I did, because I can see why someone in Mark's position might consider that to be a homophobic statement, because he really went after me. He brought the claws out with a response and just called me a homophobe, said all these different things and so on and so forth, and we really got off on the wrong possible foot. And I to anyone that knows me, that's not who I am. And I hate it when people get the wrong impression of me, and I try to do what I can to make things right. And so by the time I watched this documentary, I still hadn't made things right, and I was just really on the fence about the documentary because there was this rift between me and Mark, and I was just like, well, this movie is, focusing on Mark Patton, and he and I are not, we had this exchange that really kind of changed the way I view him, and I kind of don't want to see the documentary because it'd be very hard for me to view it in a way that isn't, somewhat negative because of the online altercation that we had. I mean, I sent him a long message to his Facebook account, a direct message, and he never got back to me. And, it'd been months, and I was just like, it was just one of those things where, it was very disheartening. And I was kind of like, but I'm glad I saw the documentary because I had my own journey of atonement and throughout the documentary, which really made for a very unique experience because I learned more about Mark and what he had been through in his life, and he's been through a lot, and more than I have been through in my life, that's for sure. I mean, he dealt with his own battle with AIDS and other diseases that he was getting as a result of the medication he was taking that almost killed him. He dealt with the loss of the love of his life and his best friend to AIDS. He dealt with the pressure of having to try to remain in the closet during the AIDS epidemic, otherwise be outed and lose his career and his livelihood and his dream. He was dealt with all kinds of stuff throughout his life for being gay, and so it's one of those things where when you see the film, you get to know Mark on a more intimate and deeper level, and then you get to understand why he might be so quick to rush to these judgments. Is it necessarily something that's good? No, it's bad. But I think Mark knows that, and he realizes that. And he even mentions some things like that in this documentary. And it's just it's a lot of it's a learning process for Mark, because he hasn't been in the public eye for many years until fairly recently. So a lot of this is a learning thing for him to really cope with some of the feelings he's dealing with in a more productive manner, in a way where he isn't being a bully, because it's something that he absolutely does not like, and he does not want to be seen as. And this documentary, it's one of those things where when you get to know Mark, you get to know why he is the way he is, flaws and all. And I at the end of the film, I came away more impressed with and inspired by Mark because of his openness, because of his willingness to open himself up on camera in such a vulnerable and very natural way. Like he talked about so many different things that he's been through in his life, his childhood, what went on with his rise to what he felt was stardom, the start of his career, his Broadway work with Cher, and how he eventually got the role as Jesse, and how things weren't necessarily the way he thought they were going to be, and why he left Hollywood, and why he went off the grid for so long, and like I said, his own battle with AIDS, and just surviving, and then his resurrection. And in a lot of ways, Mark himself rises from the ashes by the end of this film, just like Jesse does at the end of Nightmare 2, which I thought was very poignant, and it just adds another connection, another layer to the film. And it's a real life layer, like an actual real life story of a phoenix rising from the ashes, and it's inspiring and it's admirable in a multitude of different ways. And a big part of it is that Mark also is very open to showing his flaws. It shows his petty moments. It shows him in not necessarily the best light at times. And you know what? That's reality, you know? And I thought that was very refreshing. And then to make things even better, I left a comment after I saw the film on his Facebook page, and I talked about how I liked the film, and I praised different aspects of it, and specifically said it was really moved and compelled by your story and everything. And he liked the comment. So we mended the bridge. You know, there was this moment of catharsis for me as a fan of Mark's and as a fan of Nightmare 2, where now there is no longer that rift that was there before I watched this documentary, that rift that was still there while I was watching it. And this documentary is the reason why I reached out to him again, why I made that attempt, you know, to reach out that olive branch one more time, you know, and just to try to put water under the bridge. And you know, Mark did that, and I thought that was that was so sweet, and something that really just it's a lot of ways it's a cherry on top when it comes to this documentary. Even though it's not one of my favorite documentaries. It's not a documentary I would watch over and over again. I don't even know if I even necessarily would like to own this documentary on home media or anything, but it's still a documentary that's going to have a special place in my heart because of the journey, you know, that coincided with the journey that I was watching on and in the documentary about Mark's own path to atonement. So there's a connection that I now have with this documentary that will forever be there, and I think that's a really cool thing. Um, but speaking of from a more technical standpoint with this documentary, I thought it was well directed by Roman Chimienti and Tyler Jensen. This is a film that definitely doesn't look that cheap. I thought from a production standpoint, it had some fairly high production values. I really like the 80s nostalgic vibe that's used throughout the documentary. They have like different vintage news footage, clips, and other things like that that'll play on an old TV. And the transitions and things like that were a lot of fun. And there was a lot. I like the little music score that they used, even though there were times where it sounds like the score from Nightmare 2, but then it's like not the entire. It's not really the score, so it's one of those like cover things. And you know, I was like, why couldn't they just use the actual score? But I guess maybe that might have been due to rights. But overall, I still thought the score by Alexander Taylor was good. The narration by Cecil Edward Baldwin, it's all right. I don't even really think this documentary necessarily needed narration. I think it would have been even stronger if it just focused more on the stories and Mark's words. Like have Mark narrate it. Have Mark be the one that carries the film on his back, because that's really what he's doing anyway. And I also like in terms of the direction, I felt they did a really good job having a nice selection of shots. When it comes to the interviews, they weren't all static. They weren't all in like one room or in one or at one angle, and that's always a good thing when it comes to a documentary, because it's very easy to fall into that trap when it comes to shot selection. And but I do have to admit, like I said, it's a bit scatterbrained. It's a bit scattershot in terms of its focus. I honestly feel this didn't need to be a feature-length film. There's a moment after an hour in where it feels like it could just end and it would be fine, but then it keeps going for like 30 more minutes. And I feel that the so there were some parts of it that I don't think were really that fleshed out, and one of them is definitely talking about homosexuality and horror from a thematic standpoint, and it's touched upon, but it's never really fleshed out that much. So they just really get they only really get to the surface level of that, and I felt that was definitely a little bit of a missed opportunity because it's something you don't really see discussed that much. Uh, I tend to be someone who doesn't think that Nightmare 2 is as gay as so many writers and as so many theorists and critiques and critics have made it out to be over the years. I think things have been blown up in terms of the gay subtext in the film to the point where there are people arguing that it isn't even subtext. And I honestly agree with David Chaskin, the screenwriter, where he admits that really wasn't his intention to make the film, openly gay, or to make the character of Jesse an openly gay character. And it's not that I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just I don't feel that the film itself is really the gayest horror film of all time. When there's things like City in Panic, I think that's one of them. No, it's a Hide and Go Shriek is another one, and then there's I mean, Hellbent. Hellbent is a gay slasher movie. Like, is this really gayer than Hellbent? If you've seen Hellbent, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean. Uh, and I also feel that the conversation about Nightmare 2 has shifted from it's an underrated sequel that's well made on multiple different levels, and it's very unique in terms of its plot and its structure with the possession angle, and it features some legitimately good performances by the actors and good direction by Jack Sholder, uh, and a nice, creepy sense of atmosphere and mood, to it's the gayest movie ever. It's the gayest horror film of all time, and I just feel that sells the film short. I really do feel that way. I've always felt that way. That when it comes to the discussion in Nightmare 2, that the main thing that's discussed nowadays is just how gay it is. And it even comes from people who really aren't fans of the movie, and they say they're not fans of it because of how gay they think it is. And that's problematic in a completely different way. And I think that on one hand, I think it's perfectly great, and I think it's wonderful that the LGBTQ community has adopted this film as one of their own. I have no problem with that. They can adopt it and cherish it and call it a gay horror film as many times as they want to. But it would be nice, though, to hear from other voices that talk about other parts of the film. Instead of talking about how gay Mark Patton is, talk about how good his performance is. And talk about these other things about the movie. And I don't think that that's something that should be considered controversial or taboo. That the conversation about Nightmare 2 should not just solely be how gay it is, how good it is as a sequel, and how. And it would be nice to have that discussion more and to see that discussion more instead of the main discussion being about how gay it is and about the gay subtext and so on and so forth. But that's just me personally. If you feel differently, I have no problem with that whatsoever. You can disagree with me wholeheartedly, and I would have no issue with that at all. Pretty sure there are a lot of people that are featured in this documentary that would disagree with me, and that's fine. And then there's other things, though, like it talks about being gay in the 80s. It talks about what it's like to be gay in the 80s during the midst of the AIDS epidemic, and I thought those parts were genuinely really compelling, especially hearing from Mark, who was living through that era and through that time period. I can't imagine how horrible that must have been to see all your friends coming around looking like zombies, and how horrifying. And that's a horror film. That's a real life horror film for gay actors and for gay men in that time period. because a lot of ways it was a death sentence. And and then on the other hand, if you're an actor in Hollywood, now everybody's getting outed, and if you get outed, your career is over. And so you have to make this decision of, are you going to stay in the closet and lie to yourself and to everyone else, and do this act as an actor that you're straight, and you're not gay, in order to get roles and to continue to have a career. I mean, Robert Englund even mentions that there were some actors that he knew and he was really close with who were very open with their sexuality for quite a long time. And then the AIDS epidemic happened, and then when everyone was starting to get outed by the press, they stopped being, as open with their sexuality. And that's interesting. And there's a lot of things that are mentioned in this documentary that at times do add some legitimately good context to things, and that's definitely one of them. The whole what it's like to be gay in that particular time period. It adds more context to Mark's decision and why he chose to leave Hollywood, and you can't blame him that he wanted to get away from it all, especially after everything that he was dealing with in his own life. And but then there's this stuff where it goes in and talks about Mark and his reunion with the Nightmare 2 cast members, and it kind of reminds me of 25 Years of Terror, the Halloween documentary, where it turns into more of a Comic-Con documentary, and that's not really as interesting to me. And no offense to the fans of Nightmare 2 and stuff like that. That stuff's fun to see. Where you see their thoughts on things and their perspective and so on and so forth, but it's not, but it takes away from the focus at sometimes. So I honestly feel that this documentary should have been mainly from the point of view of Mark and maybe some of his friends and colleagues and some people who were involved with Nightmare 2. Been about his story, his home life, uh, his journey to Broadway, and his journey to being an actor in Hollywood, and how he got the role as Jesse, and a little bit of the making of the movie. And then you have the bits about the actors and some of the screenwriters and people involved with it talking about how the film had this gay subtext from the beginning, and then talking about how the film was received when it was released, and some of the news articles and other publications pointing out how this film is pretty revolutionary and groundbreaking in terms of presenting a gay take on horror. And then a little bit, then some little less of the Comic-Con stuff, and then you have the whole atonement and redemption on Mark's part, where he gets the meeting with David Chaskin, gets the apology from David, but at the same time he also realizes that he was putting the blame on so many on David and on the film for why he decided to leave Hollywood and why his career didn't turn out the way that he would have liked, and that was wrong, because they had nothing to do with the AIDS epidemic. That wasn't their fault, and it ultimately was his decision to leave. And so that then leads into him learning to love Nightmare 2, despite the hurt and the pain that he felt it caused him, and embrace it, and use the platform that he's got as this new icon of horror to bring awareness to people about AIDS, and about being gay in the 80s and during that time period, and to tell people and to show people how truly discriminatory and really bad that period was, in order to make sure that that doesn't happen again. So For the most part, that focus is in the documentary, but there's a lot of different moments where it kind of careens off of it, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not really in love with the documentary, is because there are things about it that I really like and I thought were really compelling. Most of it involving Mark Patton just opening up his soul to the audience, um, and other things like Robert Englund talking about how he knew that there was this gay subtext and he was even trying to play around with it more on set, and was even willing to go as far as to being more sexually suggestive, like having a scene where he puts the one of the claw down Jesse's throat, and he actually did it on set, but then the producers or the effects guys were like, oh no, we can't do that, man, we can't do that because that makes it look as if Jesse's blowing Freddy. We can't have that. But that was actually the intention. And that's and honestly, it makes sense that Freddy would use that, because Freddy's all about using inner turmoil that you're dealing with against you. And I think whether it's directly or indirectly, it definitely is present in Nightmare 2 that Jesse is at the very least questioning his sexuality and dealing with that struggle with whether or not he's gay or he's straight. Because I don't feel that the character itself is inherently written as a gay man, from what I've seen in the film, and from there are moments, but I don't think they are let's just say out and proud enough to really be considered proof that the character was written as a gay man. That's just me personally, because at the end of the day, it's the love that his girlfriend in the film has. I can't believe I forgot her name, but I'm just gonna look it up again because it just didn't. Lisa. It's the love that Lisa has for Jesse that defeats Freddy. So, at the very least, Jesse is bi because he definitely has some feelings for Lisa. That's undeniable. That's in the story. That's in the script. But yeah, it's one of those films where it'll definitely make you think, and it'll definitely provide some really good and interesting anecdotes to chew on, and especially as a fan of the franchise, or Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. And I don't really know what else to say about it, except it is something that I would recommend checking out at least once, just to see a different perspective on things, and to definitely hear Mark's story, because I think that is absolutely 100% something that anybody, whether they're gay or straight or bi or pansexual or whatever your sexual identity is, I think that anyone should see and should hear his story, because I think it's something that is definitely going to provide a perspective that I think is very valuable, in terms of really providing a lot of context and a lot of trying to find the right word for it. It's not necessarily relatability, but it would be for people who have been through what he's been through. But it provides, it adds a nice sense of reality to things, and provides a voice and a perspective that is very poignant and very real, despite the film that he's famous for, which is all about the absurd, and all about a lot of things that aren't real at all. But anyway, yeah, I've talked about this longer than I thought I was going to, but yeah, I would recommend checking it out. Anyway, I don't know what else to say about the film, except thanks for watching my rambling review of it, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.